Picture this: a single piece of ancient linen, darkened by time, bearing the faint but unmistakable imprint of a human figure. The face is serene, the body shows signs of trauma, and the details are hauntingly precise. This is the Shroud of Turin, one of the most debated and studied artifacts in human history. For centuries, it has sparked fierce arguments, inspired deep devotion, and defied every attempt at easy explanation. Is it the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ, miraculously preserving his image? Or is it an elaborate medieval forgery, crafted with techniques we still don't fully understand? The truth, as you're about to discover, is far more complicated and fascinating than anyone could have imagined. Think about what it would mean if this shroud was real. A tangible connection to one of the most pivotal moments in human history, a silent witness to events that shaped civilizations. Yet, even science struggles to give us a definitive answer. Radiocarbon dating once declared it a medieval fake, but then came the questions. How could artists from the Middle Ages have created something with anatomical precision that wouldn't be understood for centuries? Why does the image lack brushstrokes or pigments, appearing almost scorched into the fibers like a photographic negative centuries before photography existed? Every time we think we've solved the mystery, the shroud throws another curveball, leaving experts divided and the rest of us utterly captivated. So today, we're going on a journey, one that spans faith, science, and a puzzle that has outlasted empires. We'll explore the shroud's strange history, from its sudden appearance in 14th century France to the heated debates that still rage today. We'll dig into the science, the controversies, and the theories that range from the divine to the downright bizarre. And by the end, you'll understand why this fragile piece of cloth refuses to give up its secrets. Whether you're a skeptic, a believer, or just someone who loves a good mystery, the story of the Shroud of Turin is about to pull you in like nothing else. Ready to uncover the truth? Let's begin. The story of the Shroud of Turin, as we know it, begins in the small French town of Liéry around the year 1357, but its sudden appearance raises more questions than it answers. There's no record of this remarkable artifact before this moment, no ancient texts, no pilgrim accounts, not even whispers of its existence. It simply materializes as if history itself had been holding its breath. The shroud was first displayed publicly by a French knight named Geoffroy de Charny, a man with connections to nobility but no clear explanation for how he came to possess what many believed was the actual burial cloth of Christ. Almost immediately, it sparked both awe and suspicion. Pilgrims flocked to see it, claiming the faint image of the crucified man brought them to tears, while local bishops grew uneasy. How could something so significant have remained hidden for over 1,000 years? The Church's reaction was far from unified. Bishop Pierre d'Arcis of Troyes famously accused the shroud of being a clever forgery, writing to the Pope that the artist behind it had confessed. Yet, despite his protests, the Vatican never formally condemned it. Instead, the shroud slipped into a strange limbo, neither endorsed nor rejected, its mystery allowed to simmer. What's fascinating is how quickly the debate mirrored the one we still have today. Even back then, people wrestled with the same questions. How could an image like this be made with 14th century technology? Why does it bear wounds that match the Gospels with such chilling accuracy? Was this a miracle, a hoax, or something in between? The shroud's first appearance didn't just introduce an artifact, it introduced a puzzle so compelling that 6 centuries later, we're still trying to solve it. The image on the Shroud of Turin is unlike anything else in recorded history, a ghostly, sepia-toned impression of a man, front and back, as if pressed into the cloth itself. At first glance, it appears almost painterly, but the closer you look, the stranger it becomes. The figure lies in the peaceful repose of death, hands folded over the pelvis, bearing wounds consistent with Roman crucifixion puncture marks at the wrists and feet, lacerations across the back, and a single stab wound near the rib cage. But here's what stopped anatomists in their tracks. Every detail is medically precise in ways no medieval artist could have known. The thumbs are tucked inward, a natural reflex when nails are driven through the wrists, severing the median nerve. The blood flows match gravity's pull, with rivulets running diagonally from the arms to the elbows, exactly as they would on a crucified body hanging at an angle. Even the scourge marks show the distinctive dumbbell shape of Roman flagra, a torturer's whip tipped with metal pellets, a detail lost to history until archaeologists unearthed examples centuries later. Then there's the enigma of how the image was made. In the late 1800s, an amateur photographer named Secondo Pia took the first official photograph of the shroud, and what he discovered sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The image on the negative plate wasn't a blur, it was a lifelike positive portrait with startling depth and clarity. The shroud itself, it turns out, functions like a photographic negative centuries before the invention of cameras. No pigments, no brushstrokes, no traces of any known artistic medium. Instead, the image seems to be a result of delicate discoloration in the topmost fibers of the linen, as if produced by a brief, intense burst of energy. Modern studies using advanced spectroscopy confirm this. The image isn't painted on but chemically altered, with no directionality to suggest human handiwork. Even more baffling, the effect penetrates only a fraction of a millimeter deep, like a superficial scorch, yet replicates three-dimensional data, something no known medieval technique could achieve. Perhaps the most haunting detail is the face. Forensic anthropologists have reconstructed the man's likely appearance based on the shroud's imprint, revealing a bearded man in his 30s with a broken nose, swollen cheek, and puncture wounds around the scalp consistent with a crown of thorns. The pattern of blood flow suggests he was vertical at some point after death, as if lifted upright. And then there are the eyes. Some researchers claim to detect traces of ancient coins placed over the eyelids, a burial custom in 1st century Judea, with markings that match a specific coin minted under Pontius Pilate around the year 30. If true, this would place the shroud squarely in the time and place of Jesus' crucifixion. But here's the catch: no known method, medieval or modern, can replicate the shroud's combination of anatomical precision, lack of artistic technique, and photorealistic negative properties. It defies categorization, existing in a category all its own, an artifact that science can describe but not fully explain. What lingers in the mind long after examining the evidence isn't just the how, but the why. If this was a forgery, why go to such impossible lengths? Why embed details no one would notice until centuries later? And if it wasn't, what force could have left such an imprint? The shroud doesn't just challenge our understanding of history, it whispers of mysteries we're still unraveling. For centuries, the Shroud of Turin existed in a realm of faith and folklore until science stepped in. The modern chapter of its mystery begins not in a lab, but in a dimly lit darkroom in 1898. Italian photographer Secondo Pia was granted unprecedented access to the shroud during a rare public exhibition. When he developed his glass plate negatives, history tilted. The ghostly image on the linen transformed under the camera's eye into something startlingly lifelike, a positive image with three-dimensional depth, as if the cloth itself had captured a moment frozen in time. This accidental discovery revealed the shroud's most confounding feature. It wasn't just an imprint but a perfect photographic negative, centuries before such technology existed. Pia's photographs ignited a firestorm of scientific curiosity. Researchers suddenly had a new way to examine details invisible to the naked eye, the subtle variations in shading that formed the face, the intricate patterns of blood flow, even what appeared to be coins over the eyes. The images showed anatomical precision that clashed with medieval artistic conventions. For instance, the wound on the wrist aligns with modern medical understanding of crucifixion, piercing the space between radius and ulna, not the palms as traditionally depicted in religious art. The blood trails followed exact gravitational paths, twisting around the arms at angles that matched a body suspended on a cross. These weren't the choices of an artist, they were the unflinching records of physiology. By the 1930s, scientists began subjecting the shroud to more rigorous scrutiny. French biologist Paul Vignon proposed the image resulted from ammonia vapors rising from a corpse, a theory that, while imperfect, marked the first attempt to explain the shroud through chemistry rather than miracle. Then came the STIRP project in 1978, a team of American scientists armed with ultraviolet scanners, microscopes, and spectral analysis. Their findings only deepened the enigma. The image they confirmed wasn't painted, no brushstrokes, no pigments. Instead, the linen fibers bore signs of accelerated aging, as if exposed to a brief, intense burst of radiation. The bloodstains, real hemoglobin with traces of bilirubin, a compound present in the blood of someone subjected to extreme trauma. Even the weave of the fabric matched first-century Palestinian textiles, not medieval European ones. Yet just when the evidence seemed to tilt toward authenticity, science delivered a curveball. In 1988, radiocarbon dating tests conducted by 3 independent labs placed the shroud's origin between 1260 and 1390 squarely in the medieval period. The results made headlines worldwide declaring the shroud a forgery, but almost immediately questions arose. Had the tested samples been contaminated by centuries of handling, or worse, taken from later repairs rather than the original cloth? Skeptics noted that the shroud's pollen traces included species native to the Middle East, not France. Textile experts pointed to stitching patterns consistent with ancient Jewish burial practices. The debate wasn't settled, it had just entered a new, more contentious phase. What makes the shroud so endlessly fascinating isn't just the clash between faith and science, but how it exposes the limits of both. Every breakthrough seems to spawn new riddles. If medieval forgers created it, how did they achieve effects we still can't replicate today? And if it's genuine, what unseen force could have left such an imprint? The shroud refuses to fit neatly into any narrative, leaving us with a mystery that's as alive now as it was when Secondo Pia first peered into his developing tray and saw the impossible staring back. The year 1988 was supposed to be the moment the shroud of Turin's mystery was finally put to rest. Scientists at 3 prestigious labs, Oxford, Zurich, and the University of Arizona, were handed tiny samples of the sacred linen for radiocarbon dating, a technique considered the gold standard for determining the age of ancient artifacts. The results, announced with solemn certainty, sent shockwaves through the world. The shroud dated back only to between 1260 and 1390, firmly placing it in the medieval era. Newspapers declared the case closed, branding the relic as an elaborate forgery from the Middle Ages. But what seemed like a definitive answer quickly unraveled into one of the most heated scientific controversies of the century. Critics of the carbon dating results were quick to point out flaws in the process. The samples tested hadn't come from the main body of the shroud but from a discrete corner, an area likely handled, repaired, or even patched over centuries of veneration. Microscopic analysis later revealed that the tested threads contained cotton fibers, unlike the rest of the shroud, which was pure linen. This raised alarming questions. Had scientists accidentally dated a medieval repair job rather than the original cloth? Even more damning was the discovery of chemical contaminants. Centuries of exposure to smoke from candles, fluctuations in humidity, and even the oils from thousands of pilgrims' hands could have skewed the carbon isotopes, making the linen appear centuries younger than it truly was. Then came the statistical anomalies. While the 3 labs agreed on the medieval time frame, their individual results didn't align as neatly as you'd expect. One sample suggested the early 1300s, another the late 1200s, a spread that hinted at inconsistencies. Some researchers argued the data had been oversimplified for public consumption, masking underlying uncertainties. Textile experts added another layer of doubt. The Shroud's complex herringbone weave matched known first-century Jewish burial cloths, not the simpler patterns of medieval Europe. Even the distinctive stitching along one edge, a technique called selvage, was consistent with ancient practices, not those of the Middle Ages. Perhaps the most compelling counterargument came from an unexpected source, history itself. If the Shroud was a medieval forgery, why does its first documented appearance in 1357 lack any record of its creation? No artist was ever credited, no commission documented, no payment recorded. Forging such a relic would have required staggering skill and resources, yet not a single whisper of its production survives. And then there's the image itself. Medieval artists depicted crucifixion with nails through the palms, unaware of the anatomical reality that the wrists could better support a body's weight. The Shroud gets this detail right, along with dozens of other forensic accuracies unknown until modern medicine. The debate didn't end with the 1988 tests. In 2008, a team of scientists led by chemist Ray Rogers re-examined the carbon-dated samples using advanced microchemical techniques. Their conclusion: the tested threads had been dyed with a plant-based gum, likely used to repair fire damage after the Shroud survived a chapel fire in 1532. This contamination, Rogers argued, would have dramatically skewed the radiocarbon results. Meanwhile, researchers in Italy, applying spectroscopic analysis to undisturbed sections of the cloth, estimated its age at closer to 2,000 years, a finding that reignited the controversy all over again. What the carbon dating controversy ultimately reveals isn't just the limits of science, but the Shroud's stubborn refusal to fit into any single narrative. It's a relic that humbles even our most advanced tools, leaving us with more questions than answers. If the tests were wrong, how do we reconcile their authority with mounting counter-evidence? And if they were right, how do we explain the avalanche of details that defy medieval knowledge? The Shroud doesn't just challenge our timelines, it challenges our certainty, forcing us to confront how much we still don't understand about the past. The radiocarbon dating controversy didn't just spark debate, it ignited a race to unravel what might have gone wrong. Scientists who questioned the 1988 results began piecing together alternative theories, each more fascinating than the last. One compelling hypothesis centers on something invisible to the naked eye: bacteria. Over centuries of handling, the Shroud accumulated layers of microscopic organisms, fungi, microbes, and even bioplastic coatings from environmental exposure. These contaminants, some researchers argue, could have introduced younger carbon molecules into the linen fibers, tricking the tests into suggesting a medieval origin. Italian chemist Luigi Gallascelli demonstrated this by showing how bacterial colonies on ancient textiles can skew carbon dates by centuries, essentially rejuvenating the material in the eyes of dating technology. Then there's the fire factor. In 1532, the Shroud survived a near-catastrophic blaze in the chapel of Chambéry, France. Silver from its reliquary melted onto the folded cloth, leaving symmetrical burn marks still visible today. To salvage it, nuns patched the damaged sections and washed the Shroud in water, which may have introduced organic contaminants like the plant-based gum later identified by Ray Rogers. But the heat itself could have altered the linen's chemistry. Experiments show that even moderate heating accelerates the breakdown of cellulose, the primary component of flax fibers. This degradation could have reset the Shroud's carbon clock, making it appear centuries younger under analysis. Perhaps the most provocative theory involves something called invisible reweaving. Textile historians note that medieval artisans often repaired precious fabrics by delicately weaving new threads into damaged areas. If the carbon-dated samples came from one of these repaired sections, say, a corner reinforced after the 1532 fire, they'd reflect the age of the repair, not the original cloth. Supporting this, researchers point to odd inconsistencies in the tested samples. Some threads were spun clockwise, typical of medieval Europe, while the main shroud uses the counterclockwise twist common in ancient Judea. The most startling challenge to the carbon dating came from a seemingly unrelated field, optics. In 2005, engineer John Jackson applied modern 3D imaging to the shroud's image and discovered something extraordinary. The distortion in the cloth's weave corresponded precisely to the drape of fabric over a three-dimensional body. This level of spatial encoding, Jackson argued, couldn't have been faked with medieval technology. It would require knowledge of photogrammetry, a science not developed until the 19th century. What emerges from these alternative theories isn't just doubt about the carbon dating, but a deeper mystery. If the shroud is genuinely ancient, how did it survive centuries without mention before appearing in 1357? Some researchers speculate it might have been hidden during periods of Christian persecution, or even confused with other known relics like the Veil of Veronica. Others suggest it could be the infamous image of Edessa, a 1st-century cloth said to bear Christ's face, described in Byzantine texts but lost to history. The dating debate ultimately reveals a fundamental truth about the shroud. It resists simple categorization. Every scientific approach, whether radiocarbon, spectroscopy, or textile analysis, captures only a fragment of the picture. Like an ancient palimpsest, it seems to carry layers of history, each waiting to be decoded, and that's what makes it endlessly compelling. Whether centuries old or millennia, the shroud challenges us to confront the gaps in our knowledge, reminding us that some mysteries refuse to fit neatly into the boxes we build for them. The bloodstains on the Shroud of Turin aren't just dark smudges, they're a forensic puzzle that sparked arguments for decades. At first glance, they appear almost painted, with a reddish-brown hue that stands out against the aged linen. But when scientists took a closer look, they found something extraordinary. These stains tested positive for hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen in blood, along with traces of bilirubin, a compound that spikes in the bloodstream of someone subjected to extreme physical trauma. This wasn't just pigment, it was the chemical signature of genuine human blood, and not just any blood. The high bilirubin levels suggest the man wrapped in the shroud endured prolonged torture before death, consistent with the brutal ordeal of Roman crucifixion. Yet skeptics weren't convinced. Couldn't medieval artists have used actual blood, perhaps animal blood, to create a convincing effect? To test this, researchers analyzed the stains under ultraviolet light. Real blood fluoresces in a specific way due to its protein structure, while paint or dye behaves differently. The shroud stains passed the test, glowing exactly as human blood would. Even more telling, the blood flow patterns follow precise gravitational logic. The rivulets from the wrist wounds angled downward toward the elbows, exactly as they would on a body hanging at a 65-degree angle on a cross. The puncture near the ribcage shows a distinctive separation of serum and clotted blood, indicating the wound was inflicted post-mortem, just as the Gospel of John describes a Roman soldier piercing Jesus' side after his death. These aren't the artistic choices of a medieval forger, they're the unscripted details of biology. Then came the microscopic bombshell. In the 1970s, a team of forensic pathologists discovered something unexpected in the blood areas, traces of creatinine and ferritin, two markers found in high concentrations in the blood of torture victims. Even more baffling, the bloodstains lacked the typical capillary diffusion you'd see if the blood had been applied to the cloth after death. Instead, it sits atop the fibers, as if transferred from wounds while the body was still in motion. This matches the biblical account of Jesus being wrapped in the shroud shortly after crucifixion, before the blood had fully clotted. But the debate took a twist when skeptics pointed to a study claiming the stains contained red ochre, a common medieval pigment. This seemed like a smoking gun until further analysis revealed the ochre was actually degraded hemoglobin, broken down over centuries into iron oxides that mimic paint. Even the shroud's most damning counter-evidence crumbles under scrutiny. The bloodstains, it seems, are as enigmatic as the image itself. They behave like real blood in every test, yet they defy simple explanations, locked in a limbo between miracle and mystery. What lingers after examining the evidence isn't just scientific curiosity, but a deeper question. If this is a forgery, why go to such impossible lengths? Why embed forensic details no one would notice for centuries? The bloodstains don't just challenge our understanding of the shroud, they challenge our understanding of history itself. Whether divine or inexplicably advanced, they remain one of the most stubborn pieces of a puzzle that refuses to be solved. The pollen clinging to the Shroud of Turin might seem like a mere afterthought, tiny specks lost in the weave of a much grander mystery. But these microscopic hitchhikers tell a story of their own, one that stretches across continents and centuries. When Swiss criminologist Max Frey analyzed tape lifts taken from the shroud in the 1970s, he identified 58 different pollen types, many from plants native not to medieval France but to the arid landscapes of the Middle East. Among them were traces of Gundelia tournefortii, a thorny desert plant that blooms near Jerusalem in spring, the exact season described in the Gospels for Christ's crucifixion. Even more striking, Frey found pollen from Zygophyllum dumosum, a resilient shrub that grows exclusively in the Judean desert and the Dead Sea region. These weren't random contaminants, they were geographic fingerprints silently anchoring the shroud's journey to a very specific time and place. Critics were quick to dismiss Frey's findings, arguing that pollen could have settled on the cloth at any point over the centuries. But the distribution told a different story. The grains weren't scattered uniformly, they clustered around the head and foot areas, precisely where the fabric would have brushed against plants if used to transport a body from a crucifixion site to a tomb. Botanist Avenome Danin later confirmed this, noting that the combination of pollen species pointed to a narrow ecological window, the rocky foothills near Jerusalem in early spring. Some of these plants, like the bean caper, bloom for mere weeks in March and April, their pollen too fragile to survive long-distance travel. For the shroud to carry such a precise mix, it would have needed direct contact with the region's flora during that fleeting seasonal window, a detail impossible for a medieval forger to fabricate or anticipate. Then came the clincher, a discovery hidden in plain sight. Embedded near the shoulder area were faint floral imprints, barely visible to the naked eye. Using advanced imaging, researchers identified these as the outlines of chrysanthemum and crown daisy flower species that grow in Jerusalem and traditionally bloom around Passover. Even more remarkable, the arrangement matched first-century Jewish burial customs, where flowers were sometimes placed atop the deceased as a symbol of mourning. This wasn't just pollen, it was a snapshot of funerary ritual frozen in time. The geographic clues don't stop there. Traces of limestone dust found on the shroud's fibers carry a unique mineral signature matching the geology of Jerusalem's tombs. And nestled among the threads were microscopic fragments of aragonite, a rare form of calcium carbonate found in caves near the Dead Sea, the same caves used for burial in ancient Judea. Taken together, these overlooked details form a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to a single, inescapable conclusion. Whether by divine intervention or some lost historical thread, the Shroud of Turin has roots that run far deeper and far further east than its medieval appearance in Europe would suggest. What makes these tiny clues so compelling isn't just their scientific weight, but their quiet defiance of the shroud's supposed carbon-dated timeline. Pollen doesn't lie about geography. mineral traces don't bend to fit convenient narratives. They simply are, whispering of a journey that defies the boundaries of time and faith, leaving us to wonder how a piece of linen could carry the dust of ancient Jerusalem to a cathedral in Italy, and why its secrets remain just out of reach. The weave of the Shroud of Turin isn't just a background detail, it's a silent witness to its own history. Unlike the simple, coarse linens typical of medieval Europe, the shroud boasts a rare 3-to-1 herringbone twill pattern, a complex and time-consuming technique. This intricate weave was reserved for luxury textiles in the ancient world, a mark of status and craftsmanship. When textile historians examined it under magnification, they found something extraordinary. The threads were spun counterclockwise, a method known as Z-twist, common in 1st century Judea but rare in medieval Europe, where S-twist clockwise spinning dominated. This subtle twist in the fibers carries more than thread, it carries cultural fingerprints. Comparing the shroud to known fabrics from both eras reveals even more telling clues. Fragments of linen recovered from Masada, the ancient Jewish fortress destroyed in the year 74, share nearly identical weave patterns and thread counts. Even the selvage edge, the tightly woven border that prevents unraveling, matches 1st century Palestinian techniques, where a single, thick thread reinforced the edge. Medieval European linens, by contrast, favored simpler plain weaves or looser twills, with selvages often left unfinished or trimmed away. The shroud's construction aligns so precisely with ancient practices that some researchers have called it a textile time capsule, untouched by the evolution of weaving technology over centuries. But the plot thickens when you consider the raw material itself. The flax fibers used to make the shroud's linen were processed in a way that leaves no trace of cotton or other adulterants, a purity standard consistent with Jewish ritual law in antiquity. The Torah explicitly forbade mixing fabrics in burial cloths, a practice the shroud unknowingly adheres to. Medieval weavers, meanwhile, frequently blended fibers for cost or convenience, leaving behind telltale traces of cotton or hemp. Even the shroud's weight and thickness match archaeological finds from Herodian-era Judea, where burial linens were woven to a specific density to balance durability with reverence. Skeptics argue that a skilled medieval artisan could have replicated an ancient weave pattern, perhaps using imported Middle Eastern linen. Yet here's the catch: the shroud's weave isn't just a stylistic choice, it's functionally deliberate. The herringbone's diagonal ribs create a subtle elasticity, allowing the cloth to better conform to a body's contours without tearing. This technical insight would have been lost to medieval weavers who lacked access to 1st century Palestinian textiles for reference. Even more puzzling, the shroud's weave shows signs of deliberate skip threads, a quality control technique used in antiquity to mark ceremonial purity, not seen in European medieval production. What emerges from these threads literally and figuratively is a paradox. The shroud's fabric fits seamlessly into the world of 1st century Jerusalem, down to the most esoteric details of textile craftsmanship. Yet if it were a medieval creation, its maker would have needed not just artistic genius, but an archaeologist's knowledge of long-lost weaving traditions. The loom alone tells a story, one that humbles our assumptions about time, authenticity, and the quiet language of linen. In the end, the cloth doesn't just bear an image, it's woven with questions that ripple far beyond the loom. If the Shroud of Turin isn't a miraculous relic, how did someone create such an astonishingly lifelike image centuries before modern technology? The most popular theory among skeptics points to artistic ingenuity specifically, techniques that could mimic its photorealistic qualities with medieval tools. One compelling hypothesis involves bas-relief sculpture. Imagine pressing a linen cloth over a carved stone or wooden figure, then brushing it with a mixture of pigment and acid. The raised areas of the sculpture would transfer more pigment, creating shadows, while recessed areas would leave the fabric untouched. Experiments by artist Joe Nickel in the 1980s showed this method could produce shroud-like images with eerie accuracy, including the subtle three-dimensional encoding scientists find so baffling. The result, a negative image with no visible brushstrokes, just delicate tonal variations matching the contours of the underlying form. But the bas-relief theory has its holes. Literally, the shroud's image wraps seamlessly around the front and back of the body, as if the cloth had enveloped a three-dimensional figure, something a flat sculpture couldn't achieve. Plus, microscopic analysis reveals no traces of pigments or binders in the shroud's fibers. Medieval artists relied on egg tempera or plant-based dyes, yet the image seems to be a chemical change in the cellulose itself, not an applied substance. This led some researchers to propose an even wilder idea. Could the shroud be the world's first photograph? In the 1840s, art historian Nicholas Allen suggested the image might have been created using a camera obscura, a darkened room or box with a pinhole that projects an inverted image onto a surface. If a medieval artisan coated linen with silver nitrate, a light-sensitive compound known since antiquity, they could have exposed it to sunlight through this primitive lens. The result would be a faint, negative image, one that wouldn't require paints or brushes. Allen even produced convincing shroud-like images using this method. But here's the catch: silver nitrate leaves stark, high-contrast impressions, nothing like the shroud's soft, gradient tones. And there's zero historical evidence anyone experimented with photosensitive chemistry before the 18th century. The most outlandish forgery theory involves something called vaporography, the idea that fumes from heated spices or herbs could have transferred the image onto the cloth. Medieval alchemists were known to work with volatile compounds, and some claim vapors from myrrh or aloe, traditionally used in burial rites, might have reacted with the linen. Yet no one has replicated the shroud's precise combination of superficial discoloration and three-dimensional data using this method, even more problematic. The shroud's image isn't just a static imprint, it carries directional information, as if the cloth had draped loosely over a body rather than lying flat during its creation. What's fascinating about these artistic theories isn't just their creativity, but their limitations. Every attempted replication falls short in some critical way, whether it's the lack of pigments, the absence of brushwork, or the impossible anatomical precision. If a medieval forger crafted the shroud, they possessed knowledge and skills that vanish from the historical record, only to resurface centuries later. That paradox leaves us with two equally mind-bending possibilities. Either we've underestimated the ingenuity of 14th century artists, or we're staring at something even science can't yet explain. Leonardo da Vinci's name isn't one you'd expect to find tangled up in the shroud of Turin's mystery until you hear the wildest theory of all. Some researchers suggest the Renaissance genius didn't just admire the shroud, he might have created it using an early form of photography. The idea hinges on da Vinci's known obsession with optics and his experiments with the camera obscura, a precursor to modern cameras. Proponents point to striking anomalies. The shroud's image appeared in its current form around 1494, shortly after Da Vinci allegedly acquired a private collection of relics. Even more curiously, the face on the shroud bears an uncanny resemblance to known self-portraits of the artist, with the same distinctive long nose and heavy-lidded eyes. Could this be history's most elaborate art forgery, hidden in plain sight? The case builds on da Vinci's unparalleled understanding of light and shadow. His notebooks contain sketches of devices that could project images onto surfaces, and he famously experimented with silver salts, light-sensitive compounds later used in photography. A linen cloth treated with these chemicals and exposed inside a camera obscura could, in theory, capture a faint negative image. Intriguingly, the shroud's image lacks directional brushstrokes but shows subtle light gradients, as if produced by a single light source. Da Vinci also had motive. The Church's grip on art and science was tightening in his era, and what better rebellion than fabricating the ultimate sacred relic under their noses? But the theory unravels under scrutiny. Radiocarbon dating, despite its controversies, places the Shroud's origins firmly before Da Vinci's birth. The historical record shows the cloth was already famous by the 1400s, with detailed accounts of its appearance decades before Da Vinci could have tampered with it. Even the facial resemblance falls apart under forensic analysis. The Shroud's nose appears broken, its cheek swollen from trauma, features absent from Da Vinci's serene self-portraits. And then there's the sheer impracticality. Creating a life-sized, anatomically perfect negative image in the 15th century would have required not just technical skill, but a secrecy no historical documents even hint at. The most damning evidence against Da Vinci's involvement lies in the Shroud's weave. Textile experts confirm its 3-to-1 herringbone pattern matches 1st century Judean linens, not the fabrics available in Renaissance Europe. Even a genius couldn't have sourced or replicated 2,000-year-old flax threads. And why would he? The Shroud's mysterious image brought no fame or fortune to its alleged creator, only centuries of debate. What's fascinating about the Da Vinci theory isn't its plausibility, but what it reveals about our desperation to solve this puzzle. When science and history leave gaps, we fill them with the most extraordinary explanations. The Shroud's enigma is so profound that we're willing to bend time, overlook evidence, and even implicate history's greatest polymath rather than admit some mysteries refuse to surrender their secrets. In the end, Da Vinci's connection says less about the cloth and more about our endless fascination with the line between art, science, and the divine. For those who see the Shroud of Turin as more than just an artifact, the scientific mysteries surrounding it aren't puzzles to solve, they're glimpses of the divine. One of the most striking theories comes from physicist John Jackson, who proposed that the image could have been created by a burst of radiant energy, something beyond the scope of natural processes. Imagine a flash so intense it scorched the topmost fibers of the linen without burning through, leaving behind a perfect three-dimensional negative like a fingerprint of light. This wouldn't just explain the Shroud's lack of pigments or brushstrokes. It would align eerily with ancient descriptions of resurrection as an event accompanied by blinding radiance. The idea gains traction when you consider the Shroud's peculiar chemical signature. Advanced spectroscopy reveals the image isn't the result of oxidation or heat in any conventional sense. Instead, the linen fibers show signs of accelerated aging, as if exposed to a force that altered their molecular structure in an instant. Some researchers point to particle radiation specifically, protons emitted at high energy, as a possible catalyst. In lab experiments, bursts of proton beams have produced similar superficial discoloration on linen, though never with the Shroud's lifelike precision. Could this be evidence of a transcendent moment, a physical manifestation of what theology describes as the uncreated light of divine presence? Faith traditions have long held that sacred events leave imprints on the material world. The Catholic concept of miraculous images, like the Veil of Veronica or Our Lady of Guadalupe's tilma, suggests that objects intimately connected to holy figures can capture something of their essence. The Shroud's enigmatic properties, its seamless front and back image, its photographic negative quality, even the eerie absence of decomposition stains echo descriptions of resurrection as a transformative, incorruptible event. Early church fathers like St. John Damascene wrote of Christ's resurrection body, radiating light so intense it left marks on the burial linens, a narrative that resonates uncomfortably well with the Shroud's scientific anomalies. Yet the supernatural explanation isn't monolithic. Some paranormal researchers propose alternative forces at play, from geomagnetic energy surges to spontaneous psychokinesis, the idea that intense collective belief or trauma could imprint an image onto physical matter. Others draw parallels to rare cases of spontaneous human combustion, where bodies are said to burn without consuming surrounding materials, leaving behind inexplicable patterns. These theories, while fringe, underscore how thoroughly the shroud defies conventional categories. It exists at the intersection of faith and physics, a relic that seems to demand explanations beyond our current understanding of either. What makes these hypotheses compelling isn't just their audacity, but their humility. They acknowledge that some phenomena might lie outside the boundaries of empirical science, not as gaps in knowledge, but as glimpses of something fundamentally different. Whether viewed through the lens of miracle or unresolved physics, the shroud challenges us to consider that the line between the natural and supernatural might be thinner and far stranger than we've dared to imagine. The year 1532 should have been the end of the Shroud of Turin, or at least the end of its mysteries. On the night of December 4th, fire tore through the Sainte-Chapelle in Chambéry, France, where the shroud was kept in a silver reliquary above the altar. Flames licked at the ornate casing, melting the metal into molten streams that dripped onto the folded linen below. By the time nuns rushed in with buckets of water, the damage seemed irreversible. The heat had scorched through layers of fabric, leaving symmetrical burn holes that still mark the cloth today, a stark reminder of how close we came to losing this enigmatic relic forever. Yet the fire didn't destroy the shroud, it transformed it. When the nuns unfolded the cloth, they found something astonishing. While the flames had blackened entire sections, the iconic image of the crucified man remained eerily intact, almost as if it had resisted the fire's touch. The molten silver, however, left its own indelible mark. Ribbon-like streaks of melted metal hardened into the fabric, creating peculiar mirror image patterns that would later baffle scientists. These metallic traces weren't just scars, they became a critical piece of the shroud's forensic puzzle. Modern X-ray fluorescence scans reveal that the silver contamination is most concentrated near the burn holes, providing a kind of chemical timestamp that helps researchers distinguish between original fibers and later repairs. The fire's aftermath also explains one of the shroud's most contentious scientific controversies. To salvage the relic, the nuns carefully patched the worst damaged sections with pieces of fresh linen, stitching them into place with near-invisible skill. They even washed the cloth to remove soot and smoke residue, a well-intentioned act that may have inadvertently altered its chemistry. When radiocarbon tests in 1988 dated the shroud to the medieval period, skeptics overlooked a crucial detail. The samples came from a repaired corner, likely one of these 1532 patches. Later studies by chemist Ray Rogers confirmed that the tested threads contained cotton, a fiber absent from the main body of the shroud, and were dyed with a plant-based gum used in post-fire restoration. In other words, science might have been analyzing the wrong linen all along, but the fire's impact goes deeper than carbon dating disputes. The extreme heat could have fundamentally changed the shroud's molecular structure, accelerating the aging of its cellulose fibers in ways we're still unraveling. Experiments show that even brief exposure to high temperatures can break down flax fibers, resetting their carbon clock and making them appear centuries younger under analysis. This thermal reset theory offers a plausible explanation for why the shroud's radiocarbon results clash with its other archaeological and forensic evidence. What lingers after examining the fire's legacy isn't just the physical marks left on the fabric, but the uncanny resilience of the shroud itself. It survived not just the flames, but the very process of preservation, each repair, each clean, each well-meaning intervention adding another layer of complexity to its story. The fire should have simplified things, reducing the shroud to ashes and legend. Instead, it gave us one more reason to wonder: how does an object this fragile outlast empires, defy science, and keep its secrets burning through the centuries? Among the most intriguing and hotly debated details on the Shroud of Turin are the faint, circular markings near the eye sockets of the imprinted figure. Some researchers claim these aren't random discolorations, but the ghostly outlines of ancient coins, placed over the eyes as part of first-century Jewish burial customs. The theory hinges on numismatic evidence, the possibility that these barely visible shapes match specific Roman coins minted under Pontius Pilate. If true, it would be a bombshell physical proof linking the shroud directly to the time and place of Jesus' crucifixion. The case for the coins began in the 1980s when forensic anthropologist Alan Wanger noticed something odd in enhanced photographs of the shroud's face. Using a technique called polarized image overlay, he identified what appeared to be tiny letters and symbols around the eye areas, markings resembling those found on lepton coins, the small bronze currency circulating in Judea during Pilate's rule. One particularly compelling match was the litus, a crooked staff symbol minted on Pilate's coins between 29 and 32 AD. Wanger even claimed to decipher the Greek letters eukai, part of Tiberius Caesar's name as it appeared on the currency. The implications were staggering. If the shroud bore impressions of coins only in use during a narrow window of Roman occupation, it couldn't possibly be a medieval forgery. But skeptics weren't convinced. Numismatists pointed out that Wanger's interpretations relied heavily on pareidolia, the human tendency to see meaningful patterns in random shapes. The letters he identified were fragmentary at best, open to subjective interpretation. Others noted that Jewish burial customs of the period rarely included coins over the eyes. That practice was more common in Greek and Roman traditions. Even if the markings were coins, they could have been added later, perhaps as part of a medieval ritual or even accidental transfer from handling by collectors over the centuries. The debate took a turn when researchers employed advanced 3D imaging to analyze the eye areas. The images revealed slight depressions in the cloth, consistent with small objects pressing into the fabric. Yet these indentations lacked the crisp edges you'd expect from metal coins, suggesting something softer, perhaps burial spices or fabric pads. Then came a bombshell counterargument from archaeologist William Meacham. He demonstrated that first-century Jewish burial shrouds found near Jerusalem showed no evidence of coins, but often contained traces of aromatic resins like myrrh, applied to mask the scent of decay. If the shroud's eye markings weren't coins, they might simply be stains from these organic materials. What keeps the coin theory alive despite the skepticism is its uncanny alignment with other forensic details. The shroud's pollen traces, blood chemistry, and textile weave all point to first-century Judea. If the coins are genuine, they'd form a perfect triangulation of evidence, a timestamp etched in bronze. Yet science demands more than intriguing correlations. Without irrefutable numismatic proof, the coin hypothesis remains suspended between tantalizing possibility and unverified speculation. Perhaps the most telling aspect of this controversy is what it reveals about our relationship with the shroud itself. We scrutinize its faintest marks, desperate for tangible connections to history, as if the cloth were a cipher waiting to be cracked. Whether the eye markings are coins, spices, or simply the play of light and fiber, they remind us that the shroud's greatest power lies not in the answers it provides, but in the questions it refuses to let us stop asking. The moment Secondo Pia aimed his camera at the Shroud of Turin in 1898, history took an unexpected turn. The Italian lawyer and amateur photographer had been granted rare permission to document the relic during a public exhibition in Turin's cathedral. Working in the dim glow of candlelight, he carefully positioned his bulky glass plate camera, unaware that he was about to expose a secret hidden for centuries. When Pia developed the negatives later that night, his hands must have trembled at what emerged. The ghostly, sepia-toned image on the shroud, barely discernible to the naked eye, had transformed on the photographic plate into something startlingly vivid. The negative revealed a lifelike portrait of a bearded man with haunting clarity, as if the cloth itself had captured a fleeting moment in time. What should have been a simple documentation project became the flashpoint for one of the most enduring scientific mysteries of the modern age. Pierre's photograph did more than startle, it rewrote the Shroud's entire narrative. For centuries, pilgrims had revered it as a sacred object, while skeptics dismissed it as skilled medieval artistry. But the camera's impartial eye revealed something neither group had anticipated. The Shroud wasn't just an image, it was a perfect photographic negative, centuries before the invention of photography. In the developed print, shadows became highlights and highlights turned to shadows, creating a three-dimensional realism no painter could achieve. The wounds stood out in grotesque detail, the punctures at the wrists, the scourge marks across the back, the swollen cheek from a brutal blow. Even the texture of the skin seemed eerily precise, with pores and beard stubble visible under magnification. This wasn't pigment on fabric. It was as if the cloth had somehow recorded the very essence of a human form. Scientists scrambled to understand the implications. Photography in the 1890s relied on light-sensitive chemicals coating a surface, yet the Shroud bore no traces of silver nitrate or other early photographic materials. The image existed solely as a superficial discoloration of the linen's topmost fibers, varying in intensity to create shadows and contours. Even more baffling was the way the image encoded spatial information. Modern studies using VP8 image analysis software would later confirm that the Shroud's tonal variations correspond exactly to the distance between the cloth and a three-dimensional body. In other words, the darker areas aren't random, they map precisely where the fabric would have touched the nose, brow, or fingers, while lighter areas show where it draped loosely. This level of depth data exceeds what any known medieval technique could produce, let alone replicate accidentally. The photograph's revelation also cast doubt on long-standing theories about the Shroud's creation. If it was a painting, where were the brushstrokes? Why did the image lack any directional application, appearing uniformly crisp from all angles? And how could medieval artists have understood the principles of negative imaging without the concept of photography? Some researchers proposed that the Shroud's image resulted from a natural process, perhaps vapors rising from a corpse chemically altering the linen. Others wondered if it could be the world's first scorchograph, created by briefly exposing the cloth to intense heat. But experiments with these methods produced crude, high-contrast images, nothing like the Shroud's delicate gradients and anatomical precision. Perhaps the most unsettling question raised by Pierre's discovery was one he couldn't have anticipated. If the Shroud was indeed a medieval creation, how had its maker grasped optical principles that wouldn't be formalized for another 500 years? The camera's invention in the 1820s relied on centuries of accumulated knowledge about light and optics, knowledge that simply didn't exist in the 1300s. The Shroud's negative properties suggest an understanding of image projection and tonal reversal that defies historical context. It's as if the artifact arrived from another timeline, carrying secrets its creators shouldn't have known. What lingers after examining Pierre's photograph isn't just its scientific implications, but the profound shift it created in how we see the Shroud. No longer just a relic of faith or subject of historical debate, it became a riddle written in light and shadow, one that challenges our assumptions about art, technology, and the boundaries of human ingenuity. The camera, designed to document reality, instead unveiled a mystery that grows deeper with every attempt to explain it. The discovery of three-dimensional encoding in the Shroud of Turin's fibers wasn't just a scientific breakthrough, it was a paradigm shift. In the 1970s, researchers from the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP, made an astonishing observation while analyzing high-resolution photographs. The intensity of the image discoloration wasn't random. It correlated precisely with the distance between the cloth and the body it had supposedly covered. Darker areas corresponded to parts that would have touched the body more closely, like the nose, brow, and knuckles, while lighter shades appeared where the fabric draped loosely, such as the hollows of the eyes or the recesses between the ribs. This wasn't a flat painting, it was a topographical map of a human form, etched into linen with impossible precision. To grasp why this baffled scientists, picture how art worked in the Middle Ages. Medieval painters excelled at creating the illusion of depth through techniques like shading and perspective, but their work was fundamentally two-dimensional. Even the most lifelike portraits were approximations, interpretations of light and shadow applied by hand. The Shroud's image, by contrast, behaves like a modern 3D scan, a direct translation of spatial relationships into tonal variations. When researchers fed Shroud data into early image analysis software designed for NASA lunar missions, the program reconstructed a strikingly lifelike face, complete with accurate facial proportions and depth. No artist, no matter how skilled, could have manually calculated and replicated these subtle gradients without the concept of photogrammetry, a technology not invented until the 19th century. The implications only grow stranger under microscopic examination. The image isn't painted on the surface but chemically altered in the uppermost fibers, as if produced by a brief, directional burst of energy. The effect penetrates less than half a millimeter deep, yet somehow preserves volumetric data with flawless accuracy. Experiments attempting to replicate this effect using everything from heated bas reliefs to corrosive vapors have failed to achieve the Shroud's combination of superficiality and dimensional precision. Even ultraviolet lasers, with their pinpoint control, can't produce such nuanced tonal variations without scorching deeper layers. The Shroud's image exists in a technical sweet spot that medieval artisans couldn't have targeted, intentionally or accidentally. What makes this three-dimensional encoding so perplexing isn't just how it was achieved, but why. If the Shroud is a forgery, why embed depth data no contemporary viewer would notice? Medieval audiences lacked the technology to extract this information, making it a pointless feat of unnecessary complexity. Conversely, if the image formed naturally through contact with a body, why don't other ancient burial shrouds exhibit similar properties? The only known parallels come from entirely different contexts, like the ghostly impressions left on Hiroshima walls after the atomic blast, where intense radiation momentarily printed shadows of objects and people onto stone. This odd convergence of art, science, and the unexplained forces us to confront the limits of historical technology. The Shroud's 3D properties straddle a line between impossibility and ingenuity, leaving us to wonder whether we've underestimated medieval innovation or whether we're staring at evidence of something beyond our current understanding. It's as if the linen captured not just an image, but a moment in space-time, frozen in threads that refuse to unravel their secrets. The 14th century was an era when faith and commerce collided in a dizzying trade of sacred objects, where fragments of saints' bones and claimed remnants of biblical events changed hands for fortunes. Against this backdrop, the Shroud of Turin emerged not as an outlier, but as part of a thriving marketplace hungry for relics. Pilgrim routes across Europe were dotted with churches boasting splinters of the true cross, vials of the Virgin Mary's milk, even feathers from the wings of angels. The demand was so insatiable that one critic of the time joked there were enough nails from Christ's crucifixion to shoe every horse in France. In this climate, the sudden appearance of a burial shroud bearing Christ's image wasn't just plausible, it was practically inevitable. But the relic trade had a dark underbelly. With fortunes to be made, forgery became an art form. Medieval craftsmen perfected techniques to age fabrics artificially, stain them with pigments mimicking blood, even embed them with miraculous properties. Some used rust to simulate the marks of crucifixion nails, while others soaked cloth in plant-based acids to create ghostly impressions. The most skilled forgers studied anatomy and scripture to craft relics with convincing details, though none achieved anything close to the Shroud's eerie precision. Records from the period reveal church officials routinely condemning fake relics, with one bishop lamenting that the bones of a common thief are passed off as those of a martyr. What sets the Shroud apart from this sea of counterfeits is the sheer impossibility of its creation. Unlike typical forged relics, which relied on exaggerated claims about mundane objects, the Shroud's image defies replication even today. Medieval artists had no understanding of photographic negatives, three-dimensional encoding, or the precise anatomical details, like the correct placement of crucifixion wounds, that wouldn't be documented until the Renaissance. If it was a forgery, it would require knowledge centuries ahead of its time. Yet the Shroud's murky provenance leaves room for doubt. Its first documented owner, Geoffroy de Charny, had ties to the Knights Templar, a order rumored to possess forbidden knowledge and secret relics. Some speculate the Shroud might have been part of their hidden treasury, later surfacing when the order was disbanded. Others suggest it could have been discovered during the Crusades, when European knights regularly returned with dubious holy artifacts from the East. The timing of its appearance is telling. The mid-14th century saw a surge in relic veneration following the Black Death, as terrified populations clung to tangible symbols of divine protection. The most compelling argument against the Shroud being just another medieval forgery lies in what it lacks. Most fabricated relics came with elaborate backstories, tales of miraculous discoveries or visions tying them to saints. The Shroud arrived without fanfare, no convenient legend explaining its origins. If it was a hoax, why didn't its creators craft a more marketable narrative? Why risk presenting an artifact so complex it might invite scrutiny? Perhaps the Shroud's greatest irony is how it mirrors the very contradictions of the medieval relic trade. It emerged from an age of pious frauds, yet possesses qualities no fraudster could have engineered. It was born into a world where faith was bought and sold, yet resists every attempt to categorize it as mere merchandise. Even amid the rampant forgery of its time, the Shroud stands as an enigma, something that challenges not just our understanding of history, but our assumptions about what the past was capable of producing. For nearly 2 centuries after its appearance in France, the Shroud of Turin was a wandering relic coveted by nobility, hidden from war, and perpetually caught between reverence and controversy. Its path to becoming one of Europe's most venerated objects began in 1453, when Margaret de Charny, granddaughter of the Shroud's first known owner, traded it to the powerful House of Savoy in exchange for a castle. The Savoys, a dynasty carving out their kingdom in the Alps, recognized the Shroud's value not just as a spiritual treasure but as a political asset. They housed it in their capital at Chambéry, where it survived that fateful 1532 chapel fire, only to embark on a new chapter when Duke Emmanuel Philibert moved his court to Turin in 1578. Turin was more than a new home, it was a strategic choice. Nestled at the crossroads of Italy and France, the city became a pilgrimage destination almost overnight, drawing the faithful who braved alpine passes to glimpse the sacred linen. The Savoys commissioned a lavish chapel behind Turin Cathedral, designed by architect Guarino Guarini, where the Shroud would reside in a locked silver casket, unveiled only on special occasions. This wasn't just storage, it was theater. The chapel's soaring dome, with its intricate geometric patterns, framed the Shroud in celestial symbolism, elevating it from relic to spectacle. Yet the Shroud's journey was far from peaceful. In 1798, Napoleon's armies stormed Turin, forcing the Savoys to flee with their prized possession to Genoa, then Sardinia, hiding it like contraband. Even after its return, the 20th century brought new perils. During World War II, it was secretly moved to a Benedictine abbey in southern Italy to escape Nazi looting, stored in a wooden crate labeled "Personal Belongings of the Royal Family." The Shroud, it seemed, was always one step ahead of history's chaos. Its modern era began in 1983, when the last Savoy king, Umberto II, bequeathed it to the Vatican upon his death. Yet it remains in Turin, where today it rests in a bulletproof, climate-controlled case, shielded from light and humidity. Public exhibitions, called ostensions, draw millions. The last in 2015 saw over 2 million visitors queue for hours to spend mere seconds before the glass. Science still clamors for access. The Church balances reverence with scrutiny. What's striking about the Shroud's journey isn't just the miles it traveled, but how its meaning transformed. To the Savoys, it was dynastic legitimacy. To Napoleon, war spoils. To modern pilgrims, a touchstone of faith. And to Turin, it's become part of the city's soul, an enigma woven into the fabric of the place, as mysterious and enduring as the image it bears. By the turn of the 21st century, centuries of handling, repairs, and environmental exposure had taken a visible toll on the Shroud of Turin. The fragile linen bore the weight of its own history, literally. Medieval patches stitched over fire damage, a Holland backing cloth glued to the reverse in 1534 for reinforcement, even layers of soot and candle wax accumulated during public exhibitions. These interventions, meant to preserve, had become part of the artifact's complex biography. Then, in 2002, the Vatican authorized a bold conservation effort unlike anything attempted in the Shroud's 6 centuries of documented history, a meticulous restoration that would peel back the layers quite literally to reveal what time had hidden. The undertaking was fraught with tension. For weeks, a team of textile experts and scientists worked in secrecy inside Turin's cathedral, surrounded by climate-controlled tents to prevent contamination. Their first task: carefully remove 30 triangular patches sewn by Poor Clare nuns after the 1532 fire. These repairs, though well-intentioned, introduced foreign threads and dyes that had skewed earlier scientific analyses. Using micro-tweezers under magnifying lenses, specialists lifted each stitch, revealing sections of original fabric unseen since the Renaissance. The difference was startling. Where the patches had left dark outlines, the undisturbed linen showed the ghostly image with new clarity, its subtle gradients preserved beneath centuries of overlying cloth. Next came the riskiest procedure: detaching the shroud from its backing. The Holland cloth, a coarse linen adhered with starch paste nearly 500 years earlier, had become brittle with age. Conservators faced a dilemma: should they leave it intact, risking further degradation, or attempt separation and potentially damage the original? Working millimeter by millimeter with surgical tools, they succeeded in lifting the backing, exposing the shroud's reverse side for the first time since the Middle Ages. What they found upended expectations. While the front bore the iconic full-body image, the back was nearly blank, just faint, shadowy traces suggesting the image had penetrated only the outermost fibers. This discovery confirmed the image wasn't painted. No pigment could have seeped through so selectively without leaving clearer marks on the reverse. But restoration always carries unintended consequences. Some researchers argue the 2002 intervention, while scientifically valuable, may have erased subtle clues. The removal of fire stains and soot layers eliminated potential dating material carbon deposits that could have been analyzed with modern techniques. Even the starch used to reattach loose threads after cleaning introduced new organic compounds, complicating future chemical studies. Most controversially, conservators discarded the excised patches and backing fabric rather than preserving them for research, a decision that still draws criticism from historians. The project's lasting impact lies in what it revealed about the shroud's physical nature. High-resolution scans taken post-restoration showed the image resides exclusively in a microscopically thin layer of degraded cellulose less than half a micron deep, equivalent to a single bacterium's width. This explains why no artist's brushstrokes appear. The effect isn't applied pigment but molecular change, as if the fibers were altered by some fleeting, intense energy. The restoration didn't just clean the shroud, it stripped away assumptions, leaving behind a puzzle more profound than ever. When scientists turned their attention to the minuscule dust particles clinging to the Shroud of Turin, they weren't just sweeping up centuries of dirt, they were sifting through a genetic time capsule. Recent DNA studies have extracted a dizzying array of plant and human traces from the linen's fibers, painting a portrait of the Shroud's journey across continents and cultures. Pollen from the Middle East, spores from Europe, even microscopic flecks of human skin cells left by countless hands that touched the relic over the centuries. All these fragments whisper clues about where the Shroud has been and who might have interacted with it. But as always with this enigmatic artifact, the answers are far from straightforward. Geneticists working with samples collected from the Shroud identified a staggering variety of plant DNA, much of it matching species native to the Mediterranean basin. Olive, wheat, and even traces of date palm, plants deeply tied to the agricultural landscape of ancient Judea, appear alongside European species like clover and ryegrass. This aligns with the Shroud's purported journey from Jerusalem to Edessa, Constantinople, and finally Europe. But here's the catch: these plant traces aren't exclusive to the Holy Land. Many could have been picked up during the Shroud centuries in France and Italy, or even introduced during medieval veneration when worshippers might have pressed flowers or herbs against it. The genetic data, while fascinating, refuses to be pinned down to a single time or place. Human DNA recovered from the Shroud adds another layer of intrigue. Geneticists found sequences matching diverse populations: Middle Eastern, North African, and European, reflecting the countless pilgrims, priests, and scholars who handled the relic over the centuries. Some researchers hope to isolate a unique genetic signature, perhaps linking it to specific historical figures or regions, but the reality is messier. The Shroud's DNA is a palimpsest of humanity, with contributions from so many sources that isolating any single individual's genetic material is nearly impossible. Contamination is a constant challenge. Every touch, every breath near the cloth leaves behind traces, and modern handling has inevitably introduced new genetic noise. One of the most tantalizing and debated discoveries came from a study claiming to identify DNA with rare haplogroups found among certain Sephardic Jewish communities and Druze populations. Could these be genetic echoes of the Shroud's earliest caretakers? Skeptics argue that these markers aren't exclusive enough to draw firm conclusions, and without knowing when or how they were deposited, their significance remains speculative. It's a recurring theme in Shroud research. Every potential breakthrough comes hedged with caveats. The limitations of DNA analysis become starkly clear when we consider the Shroud's turbulent history. Fire, water damage, repairs with foreign textiles, even exposure to bacteria and fungi, all these factors degrade genetic material over time. What survives is often fragmented, making it difficult to sequence accurately. And there's the ever-present problem of distinguishing between original DNA and later contamination. A single medieval priest handling the Shroud with unwashed hands could have left genetic traces that now appear just as ancient as those from the 1st century. What emerges from these studies isn't a tidy origin story, but a tangled web of possibilities. The Shroud's DNA acts less like a fingerprint and more like a mosaic, each fragment a piece of a larger picture we're still struggling to see. For every genetic clue that seems to point toward Jerusalem, there's another that could just as easily reflect its time in Europe. Science, once again, finds itself humbled by an artifact that refuses to surrender its secrets easily. The genetic trail, like the Shroud itself, remains tantalizingly out of focus, a whisper from the past that we can hear but not yet fully understand. While the Shroud of Turin dominates discussions of ancient burial cloths, another relic waits quietly in the shadows, the sudarium of Oviedo. This small, blood-stained linen, housed in a Spanish cathedral since the 8th century, carries its own mysteries. Unlike the Shroud's full body imprint, the sudarium is modest, just 34 by 21 inches, bearing no image, only dark, asymmetrical stains. Tradition claims it wrapped the head of Christ after the crucifixion, a grisly complement to the Shroud's full body covering. But when scientists compared the two, they uncovered startling connections that challenged skeptics and believers alike. Forensic analysis reveals the blood on both cloths shares the same rare AB blood group, a type common in the Middle East but unusual in medieval Europe. Even more compelling, the stain patterns align with eerie precision. The Sudarium stains cluster in two distinct areas, one set from the nose and mouth, consistent with the pulmonary edema that accompanies crucifixion, the other from the back of the head, matching the Shroud's hairline wounds. When superimposed, the blood flows mirror each other exactly, as though both cloths touched the same wounded man within minutes. The Sudarium stains show signs of post-mortem transfer, while the Shrouds bear the hallmarks of active bleeding, fitting the biblical sequence where the face cloth was removed before the body was wrapped. Yet for all their parallels, the relics' histories diverge sharply. The Sudarium's provenance is arguably clearer, documented as early as the 6th century in Palestine before being spirited to Spain during the Muslim conquests. Unlike the Shroud's sudden appearance in 14th century France, the Sudarium had centuries of veneration before reaching Europe. Its blood, while matching the Shroud's type, lacks the Shroud's confounding bilirubin levels, leaving room for debate. And then there's the biggest difference: the Sudarium has no image, just stains. If it's part of the same burial, why did one cloth capture a miraculous portrait while the other remained blank? The answer might lie in how the two relics were used. The Sudarium, as a face cloth, would have been applied immediately after death to stem the flow from the nose and mouth, then discarded. The Shroud, wrapped later, could have enveloped the body during some transformative event, whether decomposition or something more enigmatic. This timing gap might explain why one bears an image and the other doesn't. Or perhaps the difference is material. The Sudarium's coarser weave, less refined than the Shroud's herringbone linen, may have been less receptive to whatever process created the imprint. What emerges from comparing these two cloths isn't proof but pattern. Separated by centuries and cultures, they share forensic details no forger could have coordinated. The bloodstains tell a story, one of trauma, of hurried burial, of two textiles touching the same broken body. Whether that body belonged to a crucified teacher from Nazareth or another victim of Rome's brutality, the intertwined tales of these Shrouds remind us that history's greatest mysteries are seldom solitary. They come in fragments scattered across time, waiting for us to piece them together. The Catholic Church walks a careful line when it comes to the Shroud of Turin, one foot planted in reverence, the other in cautious neutrality. Officially, the Vatican has never declared the Shroud authentic beyond doubt, yet its actions speak volumes about the relic's significance. Popes have knelt before it, millions of faithful venerate it, and the Church spends millions preserving it, all while maintaining that its true nature remains a mystery for science and faith to explore together. This delicate balancing act reflects centuries of theological wisdom. The Shroud's power lies not in its provenance but in what it inspires. When Pope Pius XI called it the Holy Shroud in 1931, he stopped short of endorsing its divine origin. Decades later, Pope Paul VI described it as the wonderful document of the Passion, a phrase that sidestepped authentication while acknowledging its emotional resonance. This pattern continued under Pope John Paul II, who called it a mirror of the gospel, not proof, but a reflection that invites contemplation. The Church's restraint is strategic. By neither fully embracing nor dismissing the Shroud, it avoids the pitfalls of dogma while allowing devotion to flourish organically. Yet papal visits tell a different story, one of quiet endorsement. When John Paul II knelt before the Shroud in 1998, his silent prayer lasted 20 minutes, broadcast worldwide. Benedict XVI called it an icon written in blood during his 2010 visit, while Pope Francis made an unannounced pilgrimage in 2015, pressing his forehead against its display case. These moments, choreographed without fanfare, send a clear signal: whatever the Shroud is, it matters. behind the scenes, the Vatican's approach blends science and spirituality. Church-funded research projects like the 1978 Stirp investigation encouraged rigorous testing while safeguarding the relic's integrity. When radiocarbon dating suggested a medieval origin in 1988, the Holy See didn't dismiss the findings outright but allowed debate to unfold, a rare flexibility for an institution often seen as inflexible. What emerges isn't ambivalence but wisdom. The Church understands that faith thrives in mystery, not certainty. Whether the shroud wrapped Christ's body or emerged from some forgotten artist's genius, its real power lies in the questions it forces us to ask about sacrifice, suffering, and the tangled threads of history and belief. In the end, the Vatican's stance may be the most honest of all. Some truths are too profound to fit neatly into boxes labeled real or fake. After centuries of scrutiny, the Shroud of Turin remains suspended between two worlds, one governed by empirical evidence, the other by unshakable faith. On the side of skepticism, the radiocarbon dating results from 1988 stand as the most formidable obstacle. 3 independent labs converged on a medieval origin, placing the Shroud's creation between 1260 and 1390. If accurate, this timeline aligns with the relic's first documented appearance in 14th century France, a period rife with forged holy artifacts. Skeptics argue that the shroud fits neatly into this context, an elaborate devotional object crafted to inspire pilgrimage revenue, enhanced by clever artistry that exploited contemporary ignorance of anatomy and optics. The lack of any historical record before the 14th century further fuels doubts. How could an object of such profound significance vanish without mention for over 1,000 years, only to surface with no credible origin story? Yet the Shroud's defenders counter with anomalies that resist simple dismissal. The radiocarbon samples, they argue, were taken from a repaired edge, a section likely contaminated by fire damage, handling, and medieval restoration attempts. Textile experts point to the shroud's intricate herringbone weave, a technique common in 1st century Judea but rare in medieval Europe. The bloodstains, confirmed to contain hemoglobin and bilirubin, behave like real trauma-induced blood, not paint. And then there's the image itself, a superficial, chemically altered discoloration with no pigments, brushstrokes, or directional application. Modern science still can't replicate its combination of photographic negative properties and 3-dimensional encoding. If it's a forgery, it's one that required knowledge of human anatomy, gravitational blood flow, and optical physics centuries ahead of its time. The most compelling arguments often emerge from unexpected details. Pollen grains embedded in the linen trace a path from Jerusalem to Edessa to Constantinople, geographical markers that align with the shroud's purported journey before reaching Europe. The faint impressions near the eyes, some claim, match Roman coins minted under Pontius Pilate, placing the cloth squarely in the 1st century. Even the wounds tell a story. The twisted posture of crucifixion, the precise angle of the spear thrust, the dumbbell-shaped lacerations from Roman flagra, all details medieval artists consistently got wrong, but the shroud gets eerily right. For believers, the shroud's inexplicable qualities point toward the supernatural. The image's superficiality, less than a micron deep, resembles a scorch, yet no known energy source could produce such a precise, lifelike imprint without destroying the cloth. Some scientists theorize a burst of particle radiation, a phenomenon with no natural explanation. The blood, meanwhile, retains its chemical integrity despite centuries of exposure, as if frozen in time. These aren't just mysteries, they're potential miracles, inviting us to consider whether the shroud could be the physical residue of resurrection, a moment when, as ancient texts describe, light transcended material limits. Skeptics, however, caution against conflating mystery with divinity. They point to experimental techniques like bas-relief rubbing or primitive photography that can produce shroud-like images even if imperfectly. The pollen could result from later contamination, the coin's mere pareidolia, and the blood. Medieval artisans had access to real human blood, perhaps even from crucifixion reenactments. The shroud's power, they argue, lies in its ability to reflect our own biases back at us. Believers see confirmation, skeptics see clever craftsmanship. What makes the shroud unique isn't just the evidence for or against its authenticity, but how it exposes the limits of human understanding. Science can describe the what but struggles with the how. Faith embraces the possibility of the inexplicable but risks overlooking simpler explanations. Between these poles lies a third option, that the shroud is neither hoax nor miracle, but something even more fascinating, a historical accident that challenges our assumptions about the past. Perhaps it's a lost artifact from an advanced ancient technique, or a medieval experiment that succeeded beyond its creator's wildest dreams. Whatever the truth, the shroud refuses to surrender it, standing as a testament to the enduring power of mystery in an age of answers. The Shroud of Turin isn't confined to hushed laboratories or cathedral vaults. It's woven itself into the fabric of pop culture, appearing in everything from blockbuster films to wild conspiracy theories. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code might be the most famous example, where the shroud appears as a tantalizing footnote in a labyrinth of religious secrets. But Brown's thriller is just the tip of the iceberg. The shroud's enigmatic aura has made it a go-to symbol for storytellers probing the intersection of faith and science. In Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the quest for sacred relics echoes real-world debates about the shroud's authenticity, while The X-Files dedicated an entire episode to the idea that its image could be an alien artifact, proof of extraterrestrial intervention in human history. These narratives thrive on the shroud's unresolved mystery, turning it into a blank canvas for our wildest speculations. Beyond Hollywood, the shroud fuels some of the internet's most persistent conspiracy theories. Online forums buzz with claims that the Vatican secretly possesses definitive proof of the shroud's divinity, but suppresses it to maintain control over religious doctrine. Others argue the image was created by advanced ancient technology, perhaps a forgotten energy source or even a primitive form of photography lost to time. The 1988 radiocarbon dating scandal only added fuel to these fires, with skeptics and believers alike spinning elaborate tales of lab sabotage, sample swaps, and cover-ups. Even the shroud's most outlandish theories reflect a deeper cultural unease. In an age of satellites and AI, how can a single piece of linen still defy explanation? The shroud's influence seeps into music and art too. Progressive rock band Yes featured it on their Tales from Topographic Ocean's album cover, while metal bands like Ghost have woven its imagery into lyrics exploring themes of suffering and resurrection. Contemporary artists like Georges Awalt and Andy Warhol have reinterpreted the shroud's haunting visage, transforming it into a commentary on celebrity, martyrdom, and the commodification of faith. Warhol's silkscreen series The Last Supper even overlays the shroud's faint features onto Da Vinci's iconic mural, blurring the lines between devotion and pop art. What's fascinating isn't just how often the shroud appears in media, but why. It's a Rorschach test for the modern mind. Believers see confirmation of miracles, skeptics see proof of human ingenuity, and storytellers see limitless narrative potential. Its unresolved nature makes it the perfect metaphor for our own uncertainties, whether spiritual, scientific, or existential. The shroud endures not just as a relic, but as a story we can't stop retelling, one that changes with every generation, yet always leaves us wondering. After 6 centuries of scrutiny through wars, fires, and the relentless march of science, the Shroud of Turin remains one of history's most stubborn enigmas. It defies categorization, hovering somewhere between sacred relic and unsolvable puzzle, between divine mystery and medieval craftsmanship so advanced it borders on the impossible. Every answer we uncover seems to birth 3 new questions. If the carbon dating was flawed, what hidden clues lie in the untested fibers? If the image formed naturally, why can't we replicate it with modern technology? And if it's a forgery, why does it bear details no artist of the time could have known? The Shroud doesn't just resist explanation, it taunts us with the gaps in our understanding. What keeps us coming back isn't just the potential resolution, but the thrill of the chase itself. This fragile linen has survived the rise and fall of empires, outlasted the skepticism of bishops and scientists alike, and endured the weight of millions of hopeful gazers. It's a mirror reflecting our deepest curiosities about history, faith, and the boundaries of human ingenuity. Whether you see it as a medieval hoax, a scientific anomaly, or something transcendent, the Shroud forces us to confront how much we still don't know about the past. And that's where you come in. What's your take? Could there be a lost technique behind the Shroud's creation, or does its mystery hint at something beyond our current grasp? Drop your wildest theories in the comments below. We're all detectives in this centuries-old case. If you're hooked on unraveling history's greatest puzzles, hit subscribe and join us as we dive into more mind-bending mysteries, from vanished civilizations to cryptic artifacts. The past is full of stories waiting to be uncovered, and the next revelation could be just one video away. Until then, keep questioning, keep wondering, and never stop searching for the truth.